Hello and welcome to another episode of the Duct Tape Marketing Podcast. This is John Jantz, and my guest today is Ann Handley. She's a Wall Street Journal bestselling author focused on helping businesses worldwide escape marketing mediocrity to ignite tangible results. Her work has appeared in Entrepreneur, the Wall Street Journal, NPR, Chicago Public Radio, and the Financial Times. She's also a principal co-founder at MarketingProfs and the author of Everybody Writes, your new and improved go-to guide to creating ridiculously content. That's the second edition. And welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Wow, that was a very, very long introduction, but I appreciate your
Oh,
generous
and that was
generous.
half of all the brilliant things I could say about you. Hey, I listen to Wait, Don't Tell Me
Uh-huh.
frequently. That's Chicago Public Radio, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, that wasn't
Yeah.
the show that I was on, but
Yeah.
yeah,
No.
it was I was on a political marketing show. They were looking at political campaigns and had me on as like a commentator. So,
How to
not
use
political marketing,
how to use
political show.
TikTok for political campaigns now,
Oh
right?
yeah, that's actually yeah. Well, there's pre-TikTok. It was video though, so there's that.
Okay. So you were on for Everybody Writes, the like old and unimproved version.
Yeah.
And sorry, I actually love that you added something to the subtitle instead of just like new edition. Um,
I love
so
that. I'm gonna start calling it that, the old and unimproved version of the book. Oh, you have that one, the original? Oh, it's old and unimproved.
so
Funny.
so I think it's fair game to ask an author, and I'm sure a publisher says, well, why in the heck would anybody buy a second edition of this? So what was your justification, I guess? And you probably didn't need it because your publisher loves you, but what was your justification for the need to write an updated version?
Yeah, it's funny because I actually did get pushback from my
Mm,
publisher. Maybe not in the way that you think, but because she said, this book, it's sold 100,000 copies. I mean, it's not
yeah,
nothing.
yeah.
And she said it still sells briskly. The book
Yeah.
is 8 years old, but it still is, it still sells really well. And she
And
said, I don't,
theoretically, the comma still goes in the same place, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's like
yeah.
nothing's changed.
Yeah, and so she said, "Why do you want to do this?" And the reason why I wanted to do it was because I just wanted to update a few things in the book. There were some examples that were dated. There were some references that just don't really apply anymore. And so I thought, yeah, you know what? I kind of want to just go through it. And I thought I would do the equivalent of, running the vacuum around the pages and
Yeah.
maybe just do a little light dusting, spray some Febreze so it smells nicer, smells fresher. That's what I thought I was going to do. And then I got into it and I started reading it and I thought, you know what? Most importantly, John, my voice had changed. My voice had
Ah,
really changed as a writer over the past 8 years, and my thinking had changed. So when I dug into it, I realized I didn't talk about a lot of things that I think are important now in marketing in 2022. So things like email newsletters, things like
yeah.
understanding how to write a good speech description. When you think, well, I'm not a speaker, well, a lot of marketers are supporting executives who do give speeches.
Mm,
So how do you get them on the main stage? That kind of stuff. How to write with humor, thinking about how to write short form video, how to write captions, all of that kind of stuff, like photo captions, visuals. And so there's a lot of things that I just wasn't really on my radar 8 years ago that I thought I really want to dig into it a little bit more. So as a result, what I thought was going to be a light vacuum, some dusting, and some Febreze spraying turned into, we're going to take this right down to the studs and we're going to rebuild it from the ground up. I added a bunch of new stuff to the book. That's why it says completely revised and expanded, because I added a bunch of pages, but I also cut a lot of things. I cut a lot of the boring stuff, is the way that I thought about it. Like if I read it and I thought, God, who would read this? Like if it put me to sleep, I was like, yeah, we're cutting that one right out. So for example, there's a whole section on readability in the old version, in the old and unimproved in your vernacular version. Um, I cut that right out because I was like, you know what? That's, no one cares about that. So let's just get it right out. I moved a little bit of it to the tools section at the end, but yeah, but more than that, I really wanted to give a fresher look at writing in 2022.
well, and let's face it, every author would benefit from, here's a whole bunch of my books. Everybody go read them and then come back and tell me what you think, right? I mean, I'm sure that some of it was just based on what news stories, but also what people told you resonated, didn't work. They, made you think about something differently. I mean, it's kind of a gift to have that, and you don't often get that and the chance to do what you did.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Actually, I didn't really think about it in those terms, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been out talking to marketers over the past 8 years, and so I have a good sense of, what they love about it, what they don't love about it. I had the benefit of that sort of ground research, I guess,
Yeah.
but also looking at review sites like Goodreads and like Amazon, and trying to understand, what works for people and what doesn't.
Yeah.
So all of that really helped too.
So, I mean, on the surface, everybody writes, sounds like a book about writing. And of course, it is a book about writing. But you, because of your world of being in content and marketing, I mean, a lot of people that have purchased this book have purchased this as a content marketing book
Hmm.
as well. So, what in the 8 years has changed the most about content marketing?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. I
Oh,
think a lot of
I got bigger ones. So go
Oh
ahead.
wow, I love that. Right, big stuff, John. A lot has changed over the past 8 years about content marketing. When I first wrote this book, I wrote it on the heels of Content Rules, which came
Hmm.
out four
With
years
CC
previous to
Chapman.
this one
Yeah.
with CCR, my good friend CC. Um, and we published that book at a time when content marketing was nascent. It was
Yeah.
kind of a thing that some people were doing, but not very consistently.
Yeah.
So 4 years later, when the old and unimproved version came out, it was at a point in time where 2014, where people were starting to take content marketing pretty seriously. It was
Hmm.
starting to be embedded within an organization, but they were still trying to figure out, well, how does it fit with marketing, and where does it live within an organization? And so here, fast forward now to 2022, new book comes out. And I think that there's a lot of things that have changed operationally within organizations. But the most important thing, and really one of the driving factors behind the new edition, is that, writing content just to play the SEO game
Right.
is not going to cut it anymore. Google has gotten very, very smart about figuring out whether something is valuable or not. And so they keep releasing updates that will surface the great stuff. So, what does that mean? It puts new pressure on marketers and businesses generally to produce the kind of content that is actually going to be valuable to the people who are going to access it. So I think that's one big thing, and so it puts new pressure on the kinds of stories that we tell and the way that we write to engage an audience. And when I say write, I mean it could be the way that we produce to engage
Hmm.
an audience. It could be anything. But I think the second thing is that I've seen definitely a shift in the way that we view content. Like we're using it now to set ourselves apart, like not just to fill a pipeline full of leads to throw over to nurture and eventually end up in sales, but to really tell a story in a way that is going to differentiate us and our products and our services. And so all of those things I think are very different in the new book, and why I talk about things like brand voice in the new edition. I talk about things like storytelling. I did kind of mention both in the first edition, but in the second edition,
Yeah.
I really blew it up and talk about it a whole lot more.
Y- yeah, I mean, you really can't get 5 pages into a marketing book these days and they're not talking about storytelling, because that,
Hmm.
and it's interesting though, because I 25 years ago, I'd stand up in front of an audience and say, people want to hear your story. And businesses were like, no, they don't want to hear my story. They want to hear about the features of our product.
Hmm.
And so it's so funny now that people are tripping all over themselves, to tell their story as the first point of connection, or the first part of trust building,
Hmm.
before we even start talking about what we sell.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I also think that, we're, especially in a post-COVID world, we're so much more willing to, like, well, first of all, just to use digital marketing and digital tools, it's also put new emphasis on content, like using content. Like before we turned on the mics here, we were talking about the state of events in 2022 into
Right.
2023. So it's put new pressure on content to actually, to nurture those relationships with people, to build trust, and to
Yeah.
build some sort of connection and affinity with the people who we care about reaching. So I think, all of that is true too. But I also think that, and I hate to use this word because it's so cliched in marketing, but I think that we it's incumbent on us in business to show our faces, to show our humanity, to show people who we are. And I think that's one good thing, and I'm using good in like air quotes, like good thing that came out of
Mm.
the pandemic, because I think in a world where we are all, for the first time ever, dealing with the same thing at the same time, this sort of global crisis,
Yeah.
um, this global virus, I think that it did level the playing field, at least it was a little bit, and allowed us all to, really just speak directly to one another. And I do see that, there are elements of that that I think are have remained,
Well,
here
I
three
thought you were going to
3 years
use.
later.
I thought when you started saying cliche, I thought you were going to use the word authenticity, and
Oh,
because that's something we used for about
yeah,
10 years, right? And then one of the things I found happened was the pandemic actually called everybody's bluff.
yeah.
It's like, oh, you can't just use the word anymore. you know, it actually means something. Now
Mhm.
we understand that, and I think that was kind of a really ironic sort of twist. I think
Mhm.
authenticity we talked about for 10 years now all of a sudden was real
Yeah, I know.
or
I
not
have a
real.
love-hate relationship with that word too, because it's like, what does that actually mean? But you're absolutely right. I do think that
Yeah,
it did
yeah,
call everybody's bluff, didn't it?
yeah. So let's talk about voice.
Mhm.
I know you are a huge fan of that aspect of content. You have a very true and consistent voice. You use humor a lot
Mhm.
as part of that. In fact, I would tell people go get your newsletter, Anarchy, and there's lots of humor thrown in there.
Yeah.
How does if somebody comes to you and says, "Well, my job is to write for this uh, technical consulting firm, that does XYZ, and I feel like I'm in a box. I can't use my voice because I'm like forced, or at least I feel like I'm forced to just write a certain way. So how does somebody actually, because we all know that if somebody's writing in their true voice, it's going to be better writing.
Mhm.
So how does somebody find their voice? How does somebody use it? How does somebody value it, nurture it? You said your voice had changed, so that was a lot of
Mhm.
questions, but take a
Yeah,
stab at one of them.
yeah, a lot of questions rolled into one. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a big fan of brand voice, or or just tone of voice in general for a writer or for a creator or a communicator. Um, and just to sort of set the stage for like what is voice, like what does it mean? Like voice is, in writing, it's how our writing sounds in the mind or in the brain of the
Yeah,
reader. Like
right.
that's it. Like when I read David Sedaris, it's going to be very different than when I read something by like Tina Fey, right? When I read Bossy Pants. So it's very like there are different voices. I hear their voices in my head. So that's what it means just in general. But when you think about it in a marketing context, like what does it mean in marketing? It basically are signals of your personality that you are sharing with your audience. So what signals are you sending to an audience when they read your white paper, or when they read your
Hmm.
blog post, or when they access anything that you publish or produce? Like what do you sound like? What are you telling your audience about yourself? Um, and so I think that every company has a voice, and whether they choose to
Hmm.
really lean into that or not, I think is up to them. But I am a big advocate for absolutely defining it and leaning into it. But your question about like individual creators, like if you're working for, say, I don't know, some management consulting company who is like, oh, we want to be taken seriously, we
Right,
sell barely
right.
big solutions, and we have like lots of like
Yeah, use
companies,
synergy.
and
Use
yeah,
synergy as often as you can. Yeah.
use synergy as, and we'll circle back on that brand voice thing later. like like what do you do if you're a writer,
Right.
or a marketer or a creator within those companies? um, and I think it's a challenge. You've got to, like, if you are a creator and you don't have the power to use your own voice, you've got to find somebody who can help you, um, sort of change that tide a little bit. I mean, I just believe that you've got to find somebody in the C-suite who does believe in brand voice. But I also think that even the best companies who, maybe think that they don't have a discernible voice and that they're just maybe unclear on kind of how to use it. I mean, I think just starting by letting people know that they're by people I mean readers, letting your readers know that they're real people who are writing these
Yeah.
blog posts and ebooks and
Yeah.
white
Yeah.
papers and
Yeah.
landing pages, like just allowing a little bit of personality to shine through. Because so often, John, like the bar is super low, especially in the B2B space.
Yeah.
At the B2B forum, at the MarketingProfs B2B forum a couple of weeks ago, I shared this exact problem. I talked about this exact problem. And I share the story of a scientific instrumentation company and how their brand voice is like extremely buttoned up. Like they sell devices to laboratories, right? And so their brand voice is extremely buttoned up. Like there's nothing discernible about it at all. Their product names have like H127.5 capital H small a. Like, that's like how they name their products. And so it's like, what do you do with that? Um, and so I think that there's an opportunity there for some creative marketer in working within a scientific instrumentation company. And I'm using this as a proxy now. It's like I think there's opportunity there for any one of us who are working in a company to say, you know what, our voice is really our chance to create a connection
Yeah.
with our audience. Like that's it. Like it sounds highfalutin and literary, but it's not. It's actually just the ability to form trust and to film to form that connection. That's what our personalities do as people, and that's what our voices do for our brands as well.
And I think sometimes the real opportunity comes in, like the company you just shared,
Hmm.
in doing something that maybe the reader doesn't expect,
Yeah, exactly.
because they've just been like bored to death for 10 years, and now it's like, whoa, that I
Yeah,
didn't see that coming.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's the real opportunity. I mean, would it be safe to say that if you are going to try to decide on a direction to go, that voice of customer is always the best voice?
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes I also think
I
voice
mean,
of
in marketing, certainly.
yeah, yeah, definitely in marketing. I mean, I think voice of the customer is important, especially when you want to pull in like the language that they use.
Right.
That's really important. But I also think that it's not just that. I also think it's about who you are as a brand, and
Right.
very often, like at a smaller company, that'll come from the founder or one of the founders. And at a bigger company, I think it also will it's a conversation you need to have internally, like who are we as a company and how do we actually communicate in a way that is going to feel like a little bit more accessible to our audience. So yeah, pulling in the voice of the customer I think is key, but I also think it's part of there's an exercise in the book to sort of help you figure out what is your brand voice. um, so yes, I was just thinking about when you said like how do you find your brand voice, one of those questions in that knot of questions that you asked me. um, and I think just thinking through like how is it that we want to be seen, and why did we get into this business? I offer you a whole series of questions to go through, and what is it that excites us about it. um, and also looking at like the people who founded your company, who are we, and like what is our history, and who are we as a brand. I think all of that is plays into your voice as well.
Um, let's talk a little bit about your style. Who would be your writing twin? So, like, writer out there that you think I'm not asking you to compare yourself to them necessarily, but that you write like them, or you feel like your style is a little like them.
I don't know that I have a writing twin per se. I have a writing mentor, I guess, of my own, who he has no idea that he is my writing mentor, and probably it would just be such a weird thing to even for him to think about. But so David Sedaris, I mentioned him a
Yeah.
second ago, is probably the person who I aspire my writing to be close to. I
Yeah.
won't say it's like I don't like look at David and I think, oh, I'm going to write just like him, but there are elements of the way that he talks about things or the metaphors
Yeah.
that he um that he ascribes in his writing that I'm like, I've learned a lot from him. And so I think, I don't know, mentor is probably a good word, or maybe
Yeah.
just like he's been like a silent coach. I shared this story not too long ago in a talk, but I talked about how over the past few years, like one of the reasons why my voice has changed is because you mentioned it a second ago, because I have the discipline now to sit down every 2 weeks and write that newsletter to 50,000 subscribers on my list now. So that I started that newsletter almost 4 years ago,
Mm,
and that just the consistency of that
yeah.
over time and
Yeah.
really thinking about how do I communicate with an audience in a way that feels very authentic, I guess,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
use
Yeah.
that word for me.
There you go.
um, that's really helped me evolve my voice. So that's one way that I evolved my voice. But the second way, so just by practicing, like
Sure.
by mimicking and like by seeing what works and what doesn't, what feels right, and letting go a little bit too, and not like agonizing quite so much about, like, I felt like I would very often when I would publish something, like when I read my old blog posts, for example, and maybe you've
Oof.
experienced this too,
Oh yeah.
it's like I feel my tension. Like I was so like careful and like kind of buttoned up and like, ooh, like I just, and it's a little bit evident in the first edition too. That sort of like that kind of vibe is like I felt my anxiety a little bit, like, oh God, people are going to read this. Like I felt that. Like you, maybe anybody else reading it wouldn't see it, but I saw it because I know
Yeah. Of
myself
course.
now.
That's
Um,
really interesting. I was just the
yeah.
opposite. Mine will read like journal entries. I mean, it's
Oh,
like I can't tell you how many emails I got from people in the early days, you know, cr- pointing out my grammar, because I would
that's
just
funny.
let it flow and like publish. I published a blog post every day for like 4,000 days.
Wow.
So a lot of it was just like stream of consciousness.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I was the opposite, not so much from a grammar standpoint, but like just I feel like I approached it as a journalist, actually.
Hmm.
Is That's how
Hmm.
mine read. Instead of
Yeah.
like letting my own personality and point of view take the lead, I was always like kind of going back and forth and arguing with myself and like offering the other point of view. It's like I don't know, like who did I think I was? Like I'm not writing for the New York Times, for God's sakes.
But
Um,
you wrote for Click. I mean, you wrote when you wrote for ClickZ, it was
mhm,
more like a media publication
mhm.
than what we then
Yeah.
saw blogs become.
Yes, yes, that is
Yeah.
true. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was much more like that. And I mean, my background is in journalism. Like I worked
Right.
in journalism for 10 years before I started, before the internet happened. And so yeah, that is definitely my foundation. Now I was just going to say that. So two things that evolved my voice. One was, to have that regular practice.
Yeah.
It wasn't daily like you, but every 2 weeks
Hmm.
it's definitely helped me evolve my voice. The second thing though is I went through and read all of David Sedaris's work. I started
Huh.
right from the very beginning. I read his very first book of essays, which was published in the 90s, 96, maybe something like that. I read that book, and then I sequentially went through and read every single every single book that he'd published, like in order. So I think he's published, I don't know, 15 books, something like that, 12,
Yeah.
maybe not that many. But I went through and like in seeing how his voice evolved and
Mm-hmm.
noticing choices that he made. Like I read them as a writer, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like I
Hmm.
went through and just
Right.
the first time I read them, I just read them as a reader, like just to enjoy them. But this time I went through and looked at them
You
a little
start
bit more
saying, "Why do you make
carefully.
that choice here?"
Yeah, why
Yeah.
did he make
Yeah.
that choice? That's a
Yeah. Yeah.
curious, like, it's so funny that he compared his mother's tan to toast. And I
Yeah.
was like, that's like a funny way to think about it. And so, yeah, there's just some things that really, it helped me rethink about how I, like, by looking at the choices he made,
Hmm.
it made me think about, um, you know, how I evolve my own voice. So,
And yet, not a single f bomb shows up in Everybody Writes.
no, it's off
So you
brand
couldn't
for
have been
me.
influenced by him by too much. Have you ever seen him at live?
Oh, yeah, I've seen it like 4 times. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a handful.
Yeah.
Um, what would E.B. White think of your advice in this book?
Oh my goodness. I was gonna say he's my other literary crush. I love his work. I
Yes.
love his work so much. Oh my gosh. Actually, I just got a second edition. Oh, sorry. I just got a first edition of Charlotte's Web
Mm,
by a friend. She sent it to me for my birthday, which was like a week and a half ago. Oh my gosh, it's just like it's so special to me. I've been like lusting after a first edition of Charlotte's Web by Evie
yeah.
White
Yeah.
forever, because I've talked about this too, but it's like not that it's not because it's a fantastic children's book, which it is, but it's such a great parable for marketing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so anyway, so yeah, there's that. So what would I think? I don't know what he would think about it. I mean, I hope that he would like it. I name checked him a few times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I mean, I think E.B. White is just a fantastically talented writer. Because he can go between essays and New Yorker articles and children's books just seamlessly. You know, he wrote
Yeah.
Charlotte's Web, and he wrote Stuart Little, but he also
Mhm.
wrote The Elements of Style,
Of
which I
style,
know you're
right?
a fan of. A writing book for the ages, and then he also I mean, but really what he did is he wrote for the Atlantic Monthly for a long time, for
Yeah.
Harper's, and for the New Yorker. So
All right. So now the 800-pound elephant in the room. I thought
mhm.
you'd appreciate that mixed metaphor.
Yeah.
It's actually the 800-pound gorilla. An 800-pound elephant's actually not that big. So
Is that a
uh,
fact?
what's that? No, I,
Is
I use that all the time. I heard somebody say it. So, let's talk about the 800-pound elephant in the room, and it's obviously the 800-pound gorilla
Yeah.
or the elephant in the room.
Right,
But
right.
so it's
But
my favorite mixed metaphor.
how big is an 800-pound elephant? You're probably not that big. You're
They're
probably
born
like,
about 1,000 pounds.
oh wow, okay. Well,
So
good to
it's
know.
such a funny mixed metaphor. But at any rate, so just throw that in for the writing geeks out there that are surely listening to this show. All right. So what I really wanted to get to is I'll just throw it out there. Is AI going to replace all writers? There, have that.
Oh my goodness. 100% no. It will not replace all writers. It will replace some mediocre writers, and that's again another reason why I believe that using our opportunity to communicate with an audience in a way that is truly that embodies our own voice and that truly could only come from us, something I talk about in the book quite a bit, is so important because AI I do think is increasingly going to creep into our writing. It already is. I mean,
Sure, it is. Yeah.
I use Grammarly on a daily basis. It's my little writing robot editor that sits on my shoulder through everything that I do.
Yep.
And so it's
No,
already
no more
starting to
passive voice for you.
right. Yeah, exactly. I love to just like argue with it though. I love to flick it right away. It's like, no, you know what? I made that choice on purpose. I do that all the time. It's highly
Yes.
satisfying. But that's the whole thing, right? It's like, yes, AI is going to creep into what we
Right.
do. It's going to write first drafts for us. It's going to correct our grammar. And sometimes that's useful, but sometimes it's not. And so I think, there are two ways that I think about it. It's like, yeah, I love to just say, no, AI, this is exactly what I wanted to do as a writer, as a creator. This is what I want to convey. So, I don't take their suggestions and I love to just like dismiss. It's just really satisfying. But I think the other way that it is going to affect us is like for example, if we use an AI writing tool, we input some data and some coordinates, and it spits out the first draft of a blog post for us. Um, I think it's important that we then take that blog post and make it truly our own. So add our voice, add our personality. I think it will make writing faster for a
Hmm.
lot of people, which I think it's good and bad. I mean, I'm a realist about it. I don't think that it's not going to affect. I think it absolutely will affect us, but um, I have some mixed thoughts or some mixed alliances, I guess, about
Yeah.
how I feel about it making writing more efficient. Like that's a big selling point for a lot of these AI tools and platforms. And I'm not so sure that we want to be more efficient as writers. It's like I don't want somebody to build something for me and like talk about that they were able to do it fast. Like I want somebody to take time and craft and care. Like that's what I want. So I think that's what I want us as creators to
Yeah.
give ourselves permission to do that.
Well, I think the message certainly for creators has to be that, strategy is your superpower. I mean, if you're competing with the people writing $10 blog posts, you're in trouble. But if you're actually helping drive strategy, you're never going to be replaceable. Where we use it all the time is there is technical writing, like writing for a search engine, writing meta descriptions for a search engine is a
Yes.
technical thing that it can do better than I can,
Mm-hmm.
because it is using an algorithm that are the rules of the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another certainly case is versioning. We need 27 ad headlines to test.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
will tell you from experience that I have no idea which one's going to win, because it's just weird. And so I think those are some places where I think it definitely is serving a tremendous purpose.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah. I think two really good examples of how it's going to change things. But like even the AI writing tool platform executives, like the people who I've heard speak about it, like they've
Yeah.
even said like you can't put an AI writing tool in the hands of a non-writer and
Yeah. Yeah.
expect magic. Like it's just not going to happen. Like
Yeah.
you've got to have that basis, so um, at least for now, until they come for me and come for you, and then we're all
Well,
working for them.
it will get better. I mean, one of the things you talked about, like you like to flick away those Grammarly things. Well,
Hmm.
true AI tools will actually go, oh, Ann didn't like that
Yes,
suggestion.
exactly. Yeah,
And so next time we won't make it, or next
yeah,
time we'll make it a different way. They'll start finding your voice. They won't start eliminating really and just every time you
hmm,
say it.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, that's so
So,
true.
all right. So, Ann, where can people find, obviously the book's available anywhere, but where would you invite people to connect with you otherwise?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, so you can find me at annhandley.com if you want to subscribe to my every other Sunday newsletter, which is one of the best things on the internet. It's at annhandley.com/newsletter. You can also find me at MarketingProfs at MarketingProfs.com, and as you said, if I can find the book basically on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or bookshop.org, wherever you like to get your books.
Awesome. Well, Ann, thanks for taking a moment to stop by the Duct Tape Marketing Podcast. And hopefully we will run into you again soon, one of these days out there on the road.
I hope so. Thanks for having me.